Following Christ, Chapter 15, Good Things Take Time. Greetings, I'm JC Pilcher, and this is JCPC Apologetics. But hello guys, welcome to another video, and yes, today I'm actually out of my car. I've got an opportunity to shoot in a location that I normally would not. And I'm taking advantage of that. I'm going to be shooting some videos, and hopefully I'll be able to get a lot of stuff done from this location. Well, at least that's the plan. We'll see what happens. But today, yes, we're continuing with our regular review of Charles Spurgeon's book with Chapter 15. We're down to that home stretch, guys. This book is coming to an end. I think there's like 20 chapters in total. And today we are dealing with another good one. Again, if this is the first time you've come to my channel and you have no idea what we're doing here, it's a chapter-by-chapter review of Charles Spurgeon's work, Following Christ, which means this is not the video for you. You need to go back and start with Chapter 1 and continue up till now. It's been a very good book so far. I definitely recommend it. And just to kind of give away the whole overarching theme of this video, Following Christ is just about that, following Christ. Kind of some basics, some exhortation. This is not like a deep theological work. It's more of an encouragement to go out there and serve to the average believer, which is something that we need. We need believers who are encouraged to go out there. And what I have appreciated about this book and this chapter that we're dealing with in particular is the encouragement to young believers to get out and do something. That was something that I struggled with when I was young, never wanting to go out and actually serve Christ in any way, shape, or form. Or if I had to want to, I felt like, well, I can't do it. I'm not old enough. I don't know enough yet, and all that good stuff. This book and this chapter in particular is really geared towards dealing with the people with that kind of mentality. He says service in this chapter. He says service is something that, we ought to do regardless of our ability. The fact is, we live in a generation where we think equity, that is equal outcomes, is ideal. The fact is, God has not gifted us equally. To enrage the modern woke church, I like to say things like, God is the God of inequity. Because equity is not a good thing. Equity is sin. Equity is evil. Our goal should never, ever be to have equal outcomes for people, because people are, gifted differently. The Bible talks very plainly that God gives, in that one parable of the talents, the guy who owned the vineyard, representing God in this story, gave to each person individually differently. He gave to one talent. He gave another one 5, another one 10. He's not unjust for having done that. And that's how he treats us. Some of us he gives more. Some of us he gives less. And we are supposed to be faithful with what he's given us, not to be so concerned because, well, God hasn't given me 10. And this chapter is just about that. Even if you are a 1-talent servant, you need to go out there and serve. If you're a 10-talent servant, you better be out there serving. But all of us really should have that same mentality. You better be out there serving, because that is what God has created us for. It says that he saved us for the purpose that we should walk in the good works that he has foreordained that we should walk in. That is something that every believer should be doing. In fact, if you see a person who calls himself a believer and there is no walking in good works, there is no service of Christ, they just go fill their seat on Sunday and then vanish for, ever. That's a guy who's probably not a believer. He's just a cultural Christian. So that's the way he starts this chapter off, is encouraging people, start serving. Regardless of your ability, start serving somehow. And he then spends really the rest of the church service, the chapter, encouraging people, especially those young believers who don't know as much as, say, the theologians like Spurgeon himself, that, you don't need to know a lot. He uses the example of watering plants. He says, a slow drip will eventually water a plant. In fact, harsh torrents of rain can be damaging. And he uses that as an example of sometimes you have believers who are, and I find myself, falling guilty to this sometimes on my channel, that you have people who know more, who have studied, who have, gone to seminary or whatever, and they had this tendency to become a downpour, where they start speaking in such complex theological terms that, the average churchgoer doesn't know, that they kind of overwhelm people, and people don't have a clue what they're saying. And like I said, sometimes I catch myself on this channel where I'll just start throwing out terminology, and I realize there might be a lot of people who come to this channel who don't know what I mean by that terminology. And I don't like being a broken record and repeating definitions, but I think it's sometimes good when, especially, if you're one of those guys who do know a lot about theology, when you're talking about more complex terms, it never hurts to be a broken record. Just kind of repeat it, just so that those younger believers who may not understand those terms may become more mature believers and understand those terms in time. But it doesn't happen by you just spitting out words here, there, and yonder. It happens when you explain things and help them to understand it. I mean, really, that was kind of the downside, you might say, of my time in seminary, was the fact that I feel like that's what happened. I got a bunch of terminology, theological phrases thrown at me, and not a lot of good explanation as to what those things were. I only started learning those things after I got out of seminary, and had people, better Bible teachers, who broke things down in a way that was simple for me to understand. And so Spurgeon's kind of emphasis in this chapter is drip what little you have. If you just know a little bit of truth, that's enough. In fact, when you are talking, because he's really emphasizing conversion, sharing the gospel in this chapter. And he says, when you're out there and you're trying to share the gospel with people, sometimes you don't need to be that torrential rain of theological material. Most of the time, that's going to scare people off. You need to be more subtle. You need to just drip the truth. And, just the basic gospel is more than enough. There may be instances where you are required to have to give a presentation that requires a lot more depth. But the gospel is basic truth. If you are saved, you know the gospel, and you can drip that gospel. Later on in the chapter, he goes on to exhort the older, more mature believers to sometimes, for lack of better words, I'm going to use modern language, chill out. There is a tendency amongst those who are more learned to just kind of spit stuff out there and overwhelm people. And he says sometimes we have a tendency to kind of just dive into things like that's our first go-to. Just hit the deepest theology we can get to, and we think that'll be conversion. And he's like, hey, sometimes wisdom requires you to be quiet. Sometimes you realize that in the situation you're in right now, giving a full theological treatise of whatever you're dealing with at that time is probably not the best answer. Maybe just a little drip here, a little drip there. Those things might get your foot in the door for later opportunities to share the gospel with whatever unbeliever you might be dealing with. He also encourages those who have a desire to be teachers or preachers in a formal sense. He says, very often we have this tendency when we get, excited about something like that, we think, oh, I want to preach, I want to teach. And so that's what we do. We start preparing sermons, and we start preaching, we start teaching. He's like, again, this aspect of wisdom that we just talked about, wisdom requires that we kind of take a step back and think about our audience. And he's using this both in the church example, and he's been using it throughout the chapter as well in the example of speaking to people on an individual basis. You need to know your audience. You need to get to understand who you're speaking to and what they might need at the moment. You might have the best sermon you've ever written prepared, but if it's on a subject matter that really doesn't matter, and all truth matters, but it might not be the thing that person needs to hear right then and there, you've kind of wasted your breath in a sense. Now, I like that to an extent, but at the same time, I also want to warn some guys who want to take that sort of approach and go pragmatic. And because there's that large group of people who would say, well, you need to meet them where they're at. And that means basically use the world's methods to appeal to whatever the thing is that person happens to appeal to that person. And they have a tendency to abandon Scripture and abandon scriptural approaches to things. That's not what Spurgeon's trying to communicate here. He's emphasized over and over again, teaching biblical truth, but, if you're got a guy who's dealing with, this issue, and you choose to preach to him from the opposite angle, all truth has a tendency to get to the matter, but it might not be as effective. It's a good idea to get to understand and know people, not just to go firing off and hoping something, just basically firing things off and hoping something hits. We need to be more strategic, more understanding of the people that we're dealing with. And I think that's important because there is some tendency, especially with those really theological minds, to kind of distance themselves from the individuals that they're actually teaching and not want to get on the personal level, because the fact is most conversions don't happen from listening to a sermon. Most of them happen on a personal, somebody you know sharing the gospel with you. And so that's basically it. Now, that does basically bring us to the end of the chapter. He ends it with a very good line that I kind of resonated with me because it has to do with a lot of things I've been hearing lately and I think are important. He says, let us strive to be useful in little things. His encouragement, again, from beginning to end in this chapter is, hey, guys, use what little truth you've got. And for you guys who have a lot more truth, chill out. Sometimes you need to be a little bit more basic than you are and then build people to that point where you're at. Strive to be faithful in the little things. Don't always go out there trying to be, trying to overly impress people with your knowledge, trying to be too much. There's a tendency amongst, new believers to have that mentality of, well, I'm not worth much unless I am doing the big things that these are. If there's one thing I would like to destroy in the health, wealth, and prosperity gospel, it's that idea of, well, God's got a vision, a dream for you. He's got this big ministry, this big calling. You've got to have that big God-sized dream. I'm sure you've all heard about the God-sized dream. I lost a lot of years to my God-sized dream that never came to anything other than a barren wasteland where I lost a lot of years. The big thing that you're dreaming about may be an idol, may be something that you need to destroy, not be chasing after. What do you have today? What do you have? You've got some measure of truth. If you're a believer, you've at least got the gospel. Start small. Start where you're at. Serve God where you are. And maybe one day He will give you an increase that allows you to do those bigger things. And maybe He won't. But if you're used to serving Him in the little things, maybe one day He'll use you for the big things. And understand that those things that we call little very often are the things that have the biggest impact in eternity. We have a tendency to see things from a perspective, let's say, that God does not see them from. And if you're always just looking to live your dream, have that great ministry, that great whatever, you're probably missing out on all the small, small in your eyes, things that God has called you to. That doesn't make you less important. Be faithful with what God gives you, no matter how little, no matter how much. And that's important not only for the little guys, but also for the big guys as well, who have a tendency to think that they're too big or too important for whatever. We should never get to that point either. That's very important. I think if there was one thing I could leave us off with at the end of this video, it's the idea of, guys, God has given us all things to do. Those good works that I talked about earlier, that He's prepared in advance. Before we were born, He has prepared good works for us to walk in. And it's not necessarily a big ministry. It's not necessarily starting a business. It's not necessarily doing anything that's going to get you recognition. In fact, you just might blend in and seem like average in the world's eyes. But in everything that God gives you to do, no matter how little, no matter how big or how average your life may seem, in that life there are good works, there are good things that we can do for God that He has called us to do. And too many of us, the prosperity guys like to say, we're all shooting too low, we're shooting too low, we need to aim higher. Truth is, my experience with people I've met, most of them are aiming too high. Most of them are wanting to run before they walk. Most of them are wanting to be something big before they're willing to actually serve other people. God may not have called you to the big thing. He's called every one of us to the small things in life. Serving Him faithfully in whatever capacity He has given us. And that basically brings me to the end of this video. I don't really want to kick this dead horse anymore. But before I leave, I want to make this one final kind of admonition. Before you can actually do those good works that God has prepared for us to walk in, before you can follow Christ as the book says, there's a very important thing you need to do, and that is you need to be saved. And just because this is a Christian, a theological sort of channel, doesn't mean that everybody who's watching this is a Christian. You know, the internet is full of atheist trolls who chase Christian channels around just to be obnoxious. I don't know. These Christian channels are full of people who are Christian culturally speaking, who just want to attach to somebody that they hope will become a celebrity, and so they can say, hey, I was following this guy before he was something. Kind of a, get some sort of glory for having followed this thing. Some people just follow people for their personality. Now, I'm going to tell you, if you're following me for either of those reasons, you might want to get off the channel because I'm probably not ever going to be that big. And yeah, so if you're waiting around for this channel to go big and you can say he was one of the original guys, you're probably never going to get that. For me, this channel is the small things that I was talking about. I was always, growing up thinking, oh, I had to do the big ministry. And I realized, but I could just start teaching right now what I know. And that's where this channel basically came from. But there are those people who follow channels, ministries, and things like this, trying to follow a celebrity. In my case, I'm not a celebrity, but many other pastors out there, or many of these channels have people who are following, someone for their personality or whatever. They might think they're a celebrity for whatever reason. And if that's you, you might need to check out this video as well, because the video that I'm leaving is called What is the Gospel? And it's where I explain the gospel. And the fact is, being in church, following ministries, reading Christian books as we're doing in this video series, these things don't make you a Christian. You are not necessarily a believer just because you say you are. Just because you claim the name of Christ. There will be many people who come to Jesus in the last day and will say, Lord, Lord, did we not do all these great things in your name? They're calling him Lord. They're talking about their supposed good works. And he says, depart from me, I never knew you, you worker of iniquity. That could be you too. Whether you're a rank unbeliever, whether you're a person who considers yourself a believer, and even if you are a person who is very confident that God has saved them and that they're on the path to, that narrow path that leads to the gates of heaven, I recommend that you click on this video, give it a watch, help it to rise in the YouTube algorithms. And if you are an unbeliever, we pray that you'll be saved by the grace of God. And if you are a struggling believer, that you'll have your faith confirmed, that you'll keep your focus straight on what you should be focusing on, and that is the finished work of Christ, and that you will grow in your faith so that you can go from that little believer that Spurgeon spoke about in this chapter, who can only drip a little bit of truth, and you'll grow to being able to present the gospel in all of its glory, which, guess what? None of us will ever be able to preach it ideally. We'll never know it all, but you can at least begin to grow. With that said, that basically brings us to the end of this video. God bless, have a great day, and we will see you next time. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a comment below and feel free to like and share it so others can see it as well. Also, subscribe so that you can keep up to date on future videos. And as always, please check below to see resources that I've used that might help you further your studies. God bless and have a great day.